neurodiversity is an incredible topic that I talk about all the time. Transformed my life. A little old dyslexic managed to write an award-winning book with 110,000 words. Who would believe it? But that's only the beginning. What we're going to talk about today is kind of how to garner data and insights to inform decision-making around neuro-inclusion within the workplace. And a really funny thing, it's the same ridiculous concept and idea as a dyslexic person like me writing a 110,000 word book, right? It almost shouldn't happen. Like, it's ridiculous. But I needed the rest of the world to read the book that I would never read, right? But I needed them to. Those people who read need to read this book. And almost, this is the same type of piece of work. A piece of work that is around data and insight that's really difficult for a brain like mine to comprehend, but one that I knew that we had to do to support a particular customer. What is neurodiversity? Very briefly, neurodiversity is like biodiversity. We need natural variations in the plants, trees, and bees, and we need natural variation in the brain, the human brain. Billions of brain cells, right? So I won't go too much into that, but individuals who've been marginalized and system impacted because of the way that their brains work, like me, somebody who may be ADHD or autistic or dyslexic or co-occurrence, more than one, which is more common than not. It's those individuals who've been locked out of our workplaces, our work practices. And that's the fundamental piece of work that I now do. So another way I describe it is a little like a fish, right? The Mexican tetra-blind cavefish. So about 2 million years ago, this wonderful little fish was pushed into the darkened caves of Mexico, right? Found itself in these darkened little caves, and it evolved to be blind. It evolved to be blind, right? Wow. And then it evolved to get rid of its eyes completely. Because who needs to see and who needs eyes in an environment that is completely dark? And it would be remiss of us to think, oh, poor little fish, you know, it can no longer see. In actual fact, it evolved to be blind to be more competitive, right? To save energy. Because we produce, through the images that we see and then that we think about at night time, we lose a lot of energy. And the fish, to save energy, just got rid of its eyes. It also developed translucent scales. So if we look at the world, the way that the world works, we can think that somebody might be less than because their brain works in a different way. Yet when we look at the Mexican tetra-blind cavefish, we know the neurodiversity is by design. We were meant to have the unique and incredible brains that we have today, right? It's not a mistake. But the problem is, in the last 200 years, we've had complete transformation. We've gone from factories to Facebook. We've gone from mines to mines in Wales digging for coal, to Minecraft, right? Kids playing on a computer, right? In the last 200 years, everything has changed completely. Yet the human brain hasn't and will not have enough time to adapt to what we created. Just like when we pushed humans into darkened caves to mine for coal, what did we do? We put a little bird in there to see if it died, to know whether, shit, get them out, they're gonna die, right? We didn't think about the long-term impact and effect on their respiratory system. The fact that they would die early because we wanted coal, right? We're doing the same to the human brain in society today. We're not thinking about the long-term impact of the things that we've created. But we're now starting to recognize through things like COVID, shit, this is bad for people, these environments, these bright lights, these kind of chicken coops that we've pushed people into. So we've not got enough time to change the human brain and wait for it to evolve like the Mexican blind cavefish. We need to evolve the environment, the systems, the processes, the education system, so that we don't keep pushing people out of society, out of this incredible world that we are slowly destroying, or quickly destroying. So, on to the piece of work that we're talking about today. We did a piece of work with Clarion, 60,000 employees. They support 900,000 people in 1,300 facilities in 800 living areas. So fairly substantial organization in Europe, not as well known here in the UK. We were tasked with working with them to understand in the UK what was going on from a neurodiversity, neuroinclusion perspective. They had no idea, but they were passionate about it and they wanted to have an idea. So how were we going to help them? So we went through a 5-stage process to enable them to understand what their organization looked like. We audited and assessed their current systems and processes, policies, procedures. We interviewed a selection of key stakeholders. We did an internal workforce neurodiversity survey, and then we reviewed and assessed all the quantitative and qualitative data, and then we did feedback sessions with them. And this is what happened. So at the end, we had a 70-page high-level report. We'd assessed thousands of data points, and we made 50-plus recommendations to them through that piece of work. And it's not as complicated as it sounds, right? So that's why you're here today, hopefully. So one of the things we wanted to do, Berkeley is the UK arm of Clarion at the time, and the organization that we were working with to test this concept and this idea. Partly because of the size of the organization, we needed to focus down on a smaller element of it, but actually because they recognized that the UK was much further forwards than the rest of Europe in terms of the concept of neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. So they felt that it had more potential to be ready for this type of piece of work. But we focused all of this work around their why, and their how and their what. So the whole document connected with all of these areas so they could understand how it connected with their people, their work, their systems, their processes, right? So it's relevant. We made it relevant for them as an organization, personalized. And the HRD in the UK knew this was important because the social care vacancy rate is huge in comparison to the overall unemployment rate at the time. And that's not got any better. So they knew there was a gap, right? They knew there was people that they needed, and they knew there was a huge proportion of people who weren't in work, and they were looking at ways to make that connection. What better than people who've been marginalized and system impacted and locked out of the workplace to go, well, with a bit of support and training, there's no reason why they couldn't do these jobs that we're struggling to fill. Not rocket science. So what we found through some of the data and research analysis we were doing are stats like this, and some of you may well know these types of stats. This is from the Department of Work and Pensions in 2024. So there's other data and insights that have come before this, but this is one of the most recent from our own government. Under 30% of working age autistic individuals are in work, right? Under 30% are in work. That is absolute insanity. What is that even about? And this is not people who don't want to work. This is people who are being locked out of the system. And even worse, during COVID, not as many of them were out of work. More of them were in part-time work. Those jobs went. Now they're struggling to get back in because one of the biggest barriers to getting into the organization is the recruitment process. So they can't get back in. They spent so long getting in the first place, and now they're locked out. We're going to do something about this. But again, this is why the work made sense within the health and social care sector. So part of project launch was who's involved, agree and share any process design information and documentation, any additional information, key areas of focus, specific guidance, and then we agreed key timescales. It was about 3 months, and the touch points during that period. So what we did is part of the audit and assessment of their current systems and processes, we looked at from an applicant's perspective and also from a hiring manager's perspective, the comms, examples of employer brand, job descriptions, adverts, sources, where the talent's coming from, candidate long list, short list, selection criteria, interview and assessment, structure, process, touch points and comms, the offer, structure, process, touch points and comms, onboarding, and then any technologies involved in that part of the process as well. We looked at it all. And we know that communication matters. We know from the neurodiversity community that one of the biggest barriers is communication, or a lack of clarity around communication. Often it's like two different people speaking in this new language that both of them have started to learn, but neither of them understand. And then you realize those two new languages that they're learning are actually different languages as well, right? That's the level of complexity around what we're talking about here. when we consider the barriers to communication. And that's not just within the recruitment assessment process, that's within the workplace. That's manager to employee. They're just not speaking the same language. They're getting frustrated, and that's where the problems arise. So we needed to understand some of those key communication points to deal with them. And some obvious areas for this organisation were looking right at the very beginning of how they presented and communicated themselves just from a website design perspective. So we identified their website wasn't accessible, there was problems about being able to access some of the information in the way that it was presented and what was behind some of this text. And therefore, if you think about care environment, a lot of people being cared for in that environment, or the people looking for care for people in the environment, may have challenges themselves with sight, for example, with reading. So immediately, not only is there a challenge to neurodiverse talent, but it's actually a challenge for potential customers if they can't read the site. So we were providing some analysis and evidence and information along those lines, but also just some guidance as well around like what they were presenting. So here, well, a very simple area of feedback is where's all the people? Right, we're talking about an organisation where the neurodiversity community feel underrepresented and they can't see themselves. In actual fact, you've got a care business that's about people, right? The majority of the employees are delivering a service that's all people related, and yet we can't see people. So what they did is they changed some of the text to make it more accessible, so the site was then fully accessible. But they also added in some videos around the HR director, the managing director, explaining exactly what their philosophy was, why they do what they do, and how incredible the environment is for both those who are cared for and the employees that come in. They also added an accessibility menu so that anybody could come in and they could adapt their website and their jobs page and everything else exactly as they needed to. So, I mean, there's many that offer this service. They went with this particular organisation, but it meant that not only was the website accessible, but anybody coming in could change any element, colour, size of text, as they came in onto the site. And they also added the careers section because, believe it or not, they didn't have one. And clearly, when you're trying to encourage employees, new employees from a marginalised area, a group, then we need to ensure that we've got a route for them to go and access the additional information. We also analysed Barclays' top 7 job adverts and job descriptions for comprehensive hiring analysis. Now, this was fairly easy because the majority of their roles were quite similar. So it was quite easy for us to identify the core roles for that organisation and then to analyse those job descriptions and advertisements. What we found, from a very base element, there were complexities around the advert being more feminine coded in one area, but then the job description to that same job was more masculine coded, right? That's at a base level. So we were able to feed that back and saying, actually, you have more women within the workforce, yet your job description is more masculine coded, may turn people off. But the next layers of that from a neurodiversity perspective, and we know that certain coded words can absolutely put off neurodivergent talent, is that the skills weren't matching either. So, for example, in a care role, in the advert, it was saying you don't require any experience, right, to be really encouraging. But in the job description, it was saying experience preferred, right? Confusing. And when you started to dig deeper, there were many elements of this, right? So just in one example, you go, yeah, that's not good. But when you've got a list of 10 other things that mismatch, right, that's problematic. And what we know is that neurodivergent talent are applying for far more jobs than anyone else. Why? Because they're convoluted, they're complex, they don't make sense. There's things that don't add up, and they've already been marginalised, system impacted in their career already. So they're now hypersensitive to, I smell a fish. And therefore they're like, I'm just not applying. Because they get frustrated, and it's understandable. So making these adaptations and changes is really critical if you really want to make a difference to neurodiverse talent coming through that process. And that's it exactly there. So we can see there the feminine coded, masculine coded. One of the other challenges is thinking about how the world perceives your social media campaigns. So there are also challenges around a piece of social media. What we've got here is we've got health and social care roles in an organization that is underfunded, high pressured. They're saying you don't need the skills, but then they are. We could give the training. But then they also put on top of benefits, lifestyle benefits and discounts, 24/7 counselling and advice service, geek, and digital GP service. What? So hang on, I've been marginalised, system impacted, I've been mistreated, I really struggled to get a job, and now you're telling me when I get this job, I'm going to need all of these things as a priority. They're my benefit, that when I'm stressed out, you're going to give me counselling. And this is somebody who loves it, they love it. I'm a bit concerned about this. So we were like, yeah, might want to rethink some of that. So what we also did is we did benchmark analysis of organizations within the same sector, of lateral associated roles and organizations. I walked past shops, retail shops, and looked at what they put in the window, and guess what they put? At the time, almost any shop in the high street, they'd have a sign, small shop, and all of those signs said, exciting opportunity. I smell a fish, right? So we advise them that they may want to change some of this. Now, the problem is you outsource this to an organization and you entrust it in them to do this work for you because they're professionals. And so a lot of people just think the professionals have got it. I don't need to worry about it until you realize the professionals ain't got it, right? So these are just one of the elements, but really important and profound for them to see the potential barriers. And again, one of these things may not be a problem. You still get people coming through. When you start to add them up, the building blocks, the wall becomes too high. People just opt out. And so we did a company anonymized survey supported with telephone interviews. So we did an anonymized survey across the whole of the organization. And the reason why we did an anonymized survey to capture key data points is because 40% of autistic employees are not ready to tell people in the workplace. That's from Auticon in 2021. There's been other research, data and insights that have come out since then, ultimately highlighting the same thing. Individuals who are autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, in the majority are a bit nervous about telling employees, especially when they just put a tick box of, do you have a disability? Well, what is that? What is that for somebody who may not have a diagnosis? What is that for somebody who's never had support before? What is that? It's scary. That's what it is. If I tick that, what happens? Does somebody press a button and I just disappear from this earth? I don't know. Right? Nobody's telling me. Right? This is not, do you need help at this point? Right? There's a set of stairs. You're in a wheelchair. Oh, no. Can we help you in any way? There's a lift just from there. I know you can't see it, but we can help you. No. It's after. After all of that, after you couldn't get up the stairs, after you couldn't get into the building, after you couldn't bloody get to the interview, somebody then gives you a box to tick. Or way at the beginning, when you don't know what's ahead of you, somebody gives you a box tick. It's not good enough. So the survey was 5 minutes to complete, 19 questions, that simple. And what we found was really interesting because the organization didn't know if they were that neurodiverse. Well, in actual fact, we found out that 10% of their workforce, 1 in 10, identified as being neurodivergent under the terms that we used. So ADHD, dyslexic, dyscalculic, etc., autistic. 1 in 10 had a diagnosis on that basis. 2 in 10 more said, we think we are facing neurological barriers, but we don't have the diagnosis. So that's 30%, 3 in 10 of the workforce. And then it was 40% said we are responsible for somebody like a child or a family member for neurodivergence. That is like, boom, all of a sudden 4 in 10 in the workforce had impacted. When we started this, they were like, we're not really sure it's a thing, but we're willing to give it a go. It went from nice to have to their main strategic priority as an organization outside of business as usual. Bang. Why? because they had the evidence to back it up. You can't deny your people. And the funny thing is, those people were always there. It's not like those people just walked in all of a sudden. Those people were there already. They just didn't know. It's like not asking what's impacting your fellow people. And we also found out that only 1 in 10 of their employees had ever asked for a reasonable adjustment or an adjustment of any kind, however you want to phrase it. I know reasonable adjustment's not great. Only 1 in 10, but almost all of those were work hours, work patterns. Well, hang on, we've got a healthcare service. Think about all of the technology, the innovation, the supporting your people, and yet your people are not asking for anything to help them do their job. And we know they're facing barriers because they're telling us in the survey. But that 40% is around, this is affecting our work and our ability to do our job. And therefore, this doesn't line up. And this wasn't just at this organisation. There was ever in their career. That's bad. We've got a healthcare service where people are afraid of asking for help. That's a problem. And one of the biggest areas, 50% of them, cost of heating and living, right? 30% of them, overall mental health and well-being. Interesting thing here is food nutrition plays a massive part in cognitive behaviour. Right? Our ability to get up and be productive is massively connected to our nutrition, especially if you're neurodivergent. You have heightened sensitivity to food and nutrition. So what did they do? They fed all of their workforce. They had kitchen staff, so they decided to give every single one in their workforce a meal, because they could do that, and they could take it home if they didn't want to eat it there. And people said great things about it. It wasn't all grim, right? It wasn't just the stuff we were sharing with them. People said, like, this is one of the best equipped homes I've ever worked for. People should want to come and work for it. But they just, some of the technology and innovation and one being translated to helping the employees. So the thematic review identified gaps, back to the final piece, 70-page report, thousands of data points, 50+ recommendations, and it culminated in us being invited to their awards and recognised for the work that we were doing, which was a real privilege, because to be invited outside into an organisation to be celebrated for the work was an incredible moment. And we've since been back this year to work with their team to take a tactical approach to implementing this across the organisation. And finally, they recognised our work as part of becoming a top employer. So I was invited this year to speak at Top Employer on this topic through the work that helped them become recognised as European Top Employer. And finally, if any of that was confusing, you have no idea what I was on about, and you need something to take away, there is a document that basically outlines a lot of what I've been talking about today. My gift to you. Whew.